So everybody, we're almost there. The only thing that stands between us and calling it a day on the 2023 Responsible Raw Materials Annual Conference, which of course has been focusing in on material value chains, the criticality of trust. See, it's taken me all week to be able to say that without making a mistake, but it's great. I've got there now. Is for Ludivine and myself to attempt to try and summarize some of what we have been up to over the last week, because there have been a great number of themes, be it single words that come back time and time again, but also different perspectives cited by very, very different individuals who are coming at this discussion from different angles, different perspectives, which I think have been absolutely fantastic. Now, succinctly, over the course of the last few days, we have had a total of 50 speakers from approximately 14 countries. And in terms of the diversity of those speakers, it's approximately 50-50 in terms of gender diversity, which is fantastic. We've had people who are accountants with no crocodiles, as far as I'm aware, nearby. We've had lawyers, we've had geoscientists and engineers, policymakers, we've had politicians, we've had students, we've had people who are retired from different aspects of the sector. We've had all manner of individuals all providing their input as to, okay, what do we think trust looks like within the raw materials space, but then also as well, drawing on case studies from outside of the raw materials space. What does it take to create trust where perhaps it hasn't necessarily sat traditionally, or where it has been broken in quite a severe manner? So with regards to trying to summarize what we're looking at, I'm going to hand over to Ludivine to share some of her thoughts, and then I shall attempt to build on what Ludivine says. Not that it's not already going to be perfect, but everybody, if you can please put your hands together for the phenomenal Ludivine Wouters. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow, pressure is on. Well, thanks, Sarah. I think what's interesting here, and the reason we initially discussed this theme of trust, is because when you think of it, criticality in and of itself is a challenge of trust. We have relied on systems we didn't understand, but fundamentally trusted to deliver what we needed, right? We used to think, as Josh said, you pick up minerals at B&Q, right? I personally don't know B&Q, but I had Amazon, same difference. And I think the reality is that we suddenly realized a number of discourses, a number of narratives were becoming so dissonant that something was breaking down. So we stopped trusting the links to achieve certain objectives. We stopped trusting the systems we had accepted, even condoned before. A lot of the criticality narrative is shaped as a competition. This competition didn't happen overnight. I think Amanda was very right when she said, let's just remember how China did all this. It wasn't done without anybody's, information. It was right there. So I think the whole idea of criticality and trust, are in and of themselves a little bit of a major dissonance. The second thing that's interesting is that by definition, we are talking about incredibly complex, and I'm going to fail to say this word in English again, heterogeneous systems. I know. And the problem is, very often when we see complexity, we think something must be hidden because I'm not seeing it all. Something must be different from my expectation because I can't grasp or test or challenge every aspect. A lot of the conversations that we've had this week were about embracing the complexity, which is a great thing to say. It's a very hard thing to do because it entails trusting ourselves to navigate something that's uncharted, or worse, chartered for others and uncharted for us. So I think that's another element here. And I'm particularly sensitive to that because a lot of my work over the last few years has been trying to connect parties and stakeholders who were not connected to mining at all, who frankly were very comfortable with minerals showing up at B&Q, and who suddenly are being told, no, we've placed our trust in you. You're going to deliver on that trust, as Jeff Townsend was saying, by making sure not only we have minerals, but they're the right minerals and they're sourced in a way that we agree with. So the shifting nature of expectations is a big part of this conversation as well. What we heard this week, and I want to right now take off my hat to Sarah and Rose, who through some miracle of, being amazing, seem to put together a program every year where some guiding thread emerging is from each session or day. On the first day, we definitely hit a lot of these context notes, embracing the complexity and navigating the conversations where we're talking about the same thing, but we're not actually really meeting each other's conversation line. The second day I thought was really interesting because, in my view, almost everything we discussed came back to connections. There was a lot of discussion about how to make connections. There was a talk on reflective listening and a lot of really in-depth discussion on negotiation and processes that demonstrated the value of applying all of these techniques. What was interesting there, connecting to the first day, is the fact that time was obviously a factor. At a time when we are trying to navigate complexity with a sense of huge urgency, again, that's a trade-off right there. That's a decision to be made with no real understanding of the consequences. Do we take time to build trust? Do we run for emergency exits? Nobody quite knows. And of course, the real difficulty is there's no ultimate emergency exit because there's only one planet Earth. A lot of the conversations on, I want to say Wednesday, but of course it was Thursday. A lot of the conversations on Thursday, really interestingly, were all about transformation, transition, and change. How difficult change is, because whilst we all agree change is necessary, we would so much prefer it happen to somebody else. And navigating the complexities of change across cultures, across commercial dynamics, across value chains, is something that we discussed a lot yesterday. Because I'm so sorry, my cat is joining us, which of course is perfect to round off the week, because the difficulty today is that a lot more people are trying to be part of what mining and minerals, mean to a wide spectrum of stakeholders. The complexity is they're trying to grasp a sector which in and of itself is shifting at crazy pace. Whether you're talking about redefining how we finance things, which means that we reinvent business models. Kyle was talking to us about a lot of the work that's done by connecting communities to mining, not just as, let's make sure you're in agreement. No, you're actually part of the project. All the way to countries redefining how they pursue these goals. I think the masterclass that Carlos gave us on Chile, frankly, should be in front of almost every policy shaper I know. Because whilst everybody acknowledges the huge challenges, the opportunities are some opportunities at least are very clearly defined and targeted. And there's a lot of cohesive action towards those opportunities. Okay, so how do we all align around that? And I think it's really great because today what I heard was a lot of, all right, mining is shifting, but how do we connect to the people who care about us or who are interested in us? Whether it's Josh, basically pushing for labeling, which, by the way, is a big part of the conversation in situations where acceptability of minerals is starting to be tied to responsibility, and responsibility, one of the proxies is location, or, origin of some form. I love what Libby was telling us about BHP basically redefining one of the core mechanisms of how we operate, which is you find some cowboys, they lick some rocks, they get lucky, they stumble onto something, and then they hand it over to a big boy. Those dynamics, whilst awesome, and I can see Sarah enjoying the rock licking metaphor or reference, those models are also shifting. So I think throughout the week, we have covered a lot of ground. What I think is most complex now is to say, okay, there's a lot of goodwill. There are people who are really trying to understand each other and who are even willing to accept the consequences of change to themselves. Let's now make sure that we carry this through in a lot of the work we're doing, because at the moment, very few of these statements of principle are actually translating into action that's significant enough to change dynamics. And I just want to leave it on one last thing, not because Professor Ekin said it and he is just the greatest. But in all of these conversations and narratives, expectations are key. The expectations we place on ourselves, I think, are going to be increasingly more important than the expectations we place on others. The management of demand and rethinking what we really need and how we use it will be a big part of shaping tomorrow's picture. And it will influence how we finance this. It will influence how we design it. It will influence how we carry the business of mining and the entire value chain behind it. So maybe that's where the ultimate goal is. All of us to think about, when we talk about multiplying demand times 40, who are we kidding? There's no market where that happens. So that's what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ludivine. So just to build on what Ludivine has just said and reflect on that and picking up where you've left off. So yes, the scale of the problem. So I think what I've heard as well is that alignment on what is the challenge that we're looking at the moment, because the challenge means something different to everybody. And so being able to say, okay, what is the problem in the first place or the challenge? Let's call it a challenge because that sounds more optimistic than problem. What is the challenge that we're looking at with regards to raw material? What does it mean to each and every one of us? Because we all sit within our own universe. And are we actually talking about the same thing? Because often when we're speaking to one another, we're speaking about slightly different aspects. And I think, as Olivia put it a couple of days ago, the technology of today is not the technology of tomorrow. So as well, all of the discussions around what's on a critical minerals list, etc., it's all fairly academic, to be honest, and perhaps isn't necessarily the core of some of these challenges that we face. So that being number one, are we actually talking about the same challenge or are we inadvertently talking about different things, which happens so often by accident? The second thing is that from what I've heard this week, you cannot force trust. So this isn't an engineering problem. Yes, there are loads of tools and techniques that you can use. And Erin Meyer, I think, has been cited every single day this conference because, yes, that book is phenomenal. It's great. So there's some fantastic tools, etc., out there that can be used. But it's not something where there's no equation for trust where you can say, okay, if I do this and this and this, my output is enduring trust. So it's not an engineered solution. But what we can do, of course, is collect a lot of that data, pull it together, attribute that data, and then challenge it and be able to say, okay, what are we actually looking at? And that was something that Amanda brought to the table yesterday as well. So what does trust mean? And I have the world's scrappiest handwriting here that I shall attempt to unravel. I know it's even worse than usual, Ludivine, who would have thought? So through the course of the week, I think we've heard the following words. So trust is all about respect and taking the time to actually understand one another. It's about bravery and courage to be vulnerable and to actually feel uncertain with regards to what we're looking at. It's about having empathy for one another and taking the time to truly understand who are you actually having a conversation with or doing business with. Do you actually understand the data, for example, that you're looking at? And what are the elephants in the room? Are we actually pointing our fingers at them, or are we all gleefully ignoring something that actually somebody needs to be brave enough to say, okay, this is lovely, but what about this thing that's over there? What's our shared interest, shared values, skin in the game? What is everybody actually in it to either win or to lose with regards to doing this? And I think that that is something where yesterday, when Mark Palmer was talking about thin slicing, I thought that was really interesting. So people are only taking a very narrow scope of a problem, but the issue with doing that is then actually you miss the whole picture with regards to what's happening there. And we have to be able to look at the full picture. It needs a symphony, not a sympathy, a symphony of different techniques to be able to do it, because what works for one person or culture might not necessarily work for somebody else. And also it wobbles, in the language of Catherine McCallum. So trust wobbles, and we should expect it to wobble and not feel despondent when that trust wobbles, because the wobble says, okay, hang on, we need to talk, or we need to understand what's been going on there as well. And actually, I think with that, as individuals, we have to be able to have the choice to make trust wobble rather than feeling trapped by trust, which could perhaps come through. And that came from the discussion yesterday. So this is something here where we've all got something to bring to that table. And in the words of Barbara, just rock up and take your seat, because all of us need to be invited to that. And what we're aiming at here is that enduring and resilient trust that will change in its nature. But that's what we're going for. And of course, there are a huge variety of different approaches and things to bear in mind that we've collected through the conference over this past week. So I think with that, what we're going to very quickly do to round things off is, because we've still got some of our wonderful speakers from earlier on today who are here with us, I'm going to do a quick whip around the room from that quick summary that Ludivine and I have just given. Did anything resonate? Did you disagree with anything, or any final words of wisdom? And Shiv, I'm going to come to your wonderful self because you kicked off today's session. So we'll go to Shiv and then we'll go to Josh.
Thanks, Sarah. I think the main point that resonated with me was, I think one of the quotes is, the technology of today might not be the technology of tomorrow. And that's completely true. Things will change as we progress with kind of new development, research, and technology. And things like batteries, the kind of development cycles are so quick. Things all happen in the labs. But we have to realize to actually get to kind of that mass scale will still take a long time. There's lots of new technologies which promise improved cycles, storage capacities, charge, etc. But to actually get to that point where things are going to be in our everyday lives will take a very long time to actually get to that level. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. And the need and demand for these minerals won't just disappear overnight. It will take a kind of a gradual phase out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Shiv. So yes, exactly. So that the goalposts are changing all of the time, which is great to acknowledge. Josh, what do you reckon? And then we'll go to Anna.
So I think my takeaway from hearing your and Ludivine's summary is I'm actually quite positive about like what the future is going to hold. I think it's all looking good. Steps are being taken in the right direction. Which is really nice. I think that also like kind of an inevitability that people in the public are going to start to find out about mining and its importance, whether that's through like news kind of saying the shortages of metals, or kind of maybe mining doing more of like a public campaign like oil companies have done to show themselves as more forward facing. But I think as an industry, because we're holding ourselves as to account to be more forward facing and be more considerate for the future, I think that is going to slowly start to be more kind of be made, people become more aware of that, I guess. And I think as a result, I think trust will start to be built. People start to learn to trust mining companies, and for us to help source their metals responsibly. So that's kind of my takeaway.
Love it. Thank you very much, Josh. Anna, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Barbara.
Thank you, Sarah and Ludivine. This has been really a great panel. I haven't been able to be in a lot of the other sessions, unfortunately, because of the time difference, but today has been really great to hear everyone. I do have a cautious view on the future for the mining industry. I am keen on seeing the possibilities for the mining industry to raise to the challenges that we have, and particularly in the terms of trust. I think there are very important steps that we need to take to ensure that our trust is shared and the profits are shared as well as the costs, which I think is something that in order to ensure that trust is built and is long lasting, we need to engage with communities all over the world where the extraction is taking place and where the demand is coming from, to ensure that all this is shared across, and that will definitely build trust. But yeah, I am optimistic that we can rise to this challenge and that we can strengthen our governance to ensure that this is done responsibly and in a just and fair manner.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. Brilliant. Barbara, how about yourself? And then I'm going to bring in Rose.
All of the things that all of you have said resonate. I feel mining has so many challenges, but there are also opportunities. I am maybe a bit more optimistic than Anna. I try to be positive. I find that the fact that mining is looking at all of these things, the sector is doing so much work in so many ways, and there's so much more onus on the mining sector than anything else. So although most people are not aware, and mining is this amazing secret kept, I think the sector is very innovative and leading the way in lots of transparency and lots of these conversations and lots of these stakeholder conversations that other sectors don't even do. So that's the positive that I see. But that doesn't take away any of the other things that have been said. And change is hard. It's much easier to say we're going to do change than do it. And mining, unfortunately, it takes 15 years to put a mine in place. So it's difficult, this thing, as Shiv was saying to us, well, how do you then, well, if the technology in 15 years is different, so mining has to always work in being completely blind with what you know now. You need to, and there's billions of costs to commission a mine. So yeah, all of that is fascinating and will continue to be fascinating. And I believe in the humans working in mining. There's lots of amazing intellects and people involved that are passionate about what they do. So I think with all of that, there's enough there to build trusted relationships. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. I'm liking the way that this is finishing on a very, very happy and positive looking note, which is great. But Kieran, any final words of wisdom from your end, having sat and listened to the entirety of the conference? On you go, Kieran, and then we'll go to Rose.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to listen to the conference in its entirety and digest some of these talks and really try and understand it. And ultimately, I think the word is visibility of the industry. An example I'd give recently in the UK is a show called Country File, which I myself wouldn't ordinarily watch, except they covered the Cornish mining heritage and industry at the moment. So not only did they look at the past and some of those legacy operations, some of the legacy mines and how nature has taken over again, but also how mining is developing in that region. And it was just the fact that this was on BBC One in the UK, so it wasn't exactly pushed to the side. It was right at the forefront on a show that's extremely popular in the UK. And it was it's putting it back in the public eye. And I guess what's interesting is, the synonymous with mining is images like pickaxes, mining carts. When was the last time they were used? It's what do we really want the image of mining to be now? I think it's sort of reimagining and making sure that message of what mining looks like nowadays is pushed out to the public so people really see it for what it is. And then from there, maybe the job of rebuilding trust is easier because people's perception of the industry is actually more accurate to what is actually going on. So, not to reiterate what everyone else is saying, but just to reflect on making sure it's visible and accurate, precise, and so people really understand what mining actually is now.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Kieran. Fantastic. And Rose, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to end on a real high note, as Barbara did, because I think when we decided on the theme of this year's conference being trust, I don't think we were convinced we'd be able to fill a whole conference of people talking about that topic. It's something that makes people feel very vulnerable, and it's not something that I think typically geologists want to talk about. We're the kind of people who want to hide in a field with rocks, not talk about human emotions. The fact we've managed to fill a whole conference talking about it with people who have been so open and shared really different perspectives and different takes, I think is really positive. And I think that in and of itself shows that trust is something that is being thought about in the industry, whether it's clear to everybody from the outside or not. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody who has spoken, because trust isn't an easy thing to talk about. And it gets easier to do this every year. So it's not the easiest job in the world trying to coordinate people all over the world. And I would be lying if I said it was my favourite job. But it's always worth it at the end to create such a fantastic resource that I know so many people do get so much out of. So a big thank you to everybody. And I guess roll on next year.
Rose is the one who said it. So firstly, a massive thank you to Rose for pulling this off, because Rose is the one who pulls all of this together and does deserve all of the credit for all of this. But also thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Ludivine for also pulling a lot of these aspects together as well. And yeah, as Rose says, roll on next year. I wonder what we'll speak about then. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one. And
thank you, Sarah, for hosting the whole thing with such enthusiasm, because I don't know how you're going right now. I'm hardly going, so I don't know how you are.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Brilliant.